Welcome to Holy Health, the podcast where cutting-edge health insights meet timeless biblical wisdom. Join us as we explore the latest in wellness, fitness, and mental health, all while grounding our journey in the spiritual truths and guidance found in the Torah. Whether you're looking to nourish your body, mind, or soul, we'll help you live a life of balance, vitality, and faith. Tune in to discover how to achieve holistic health through the perfect blend of modern science and ancient wisdom. Let's dive into the fullness of life, body, and spirit together. Hey guys, this week's episode is such a long time in coming. This was something that I planned to bring to you. The topic is psychedelic therapy. And this was something that I planned on putting out even before October 7th had actually happened. And you can imagine the need for this topic today. Psychedelic therapy really is all over. Many of you maybe have never heard of this, but many of you possibly have. Because I can tell you that I know for a fact there are rabbis out there who are using psychedelic therapy, that have tried psychedelic therapy themselves. It may not seem like a very mainstream idea, but it is a very important topic, as psychedelic therapy is used to treat PTSD and a variety of other disorders. And you can imagine the amount of PTSD that Israel has currently going on. It's not just the soldiers. People can get PTSD so many different ways. And you can imagine that there are probably families suffering as well. Anybody who survived October 7th, anybody who may have seen the things go on, survivors of Nova. There are so many people today with PTSD, and this is a topic, this is something that might really be able to help them. I always believe not everything will help every single person, but there is always something to help someone. And you should hear about this idea. You should hear about a lot of different things, and then you can make a decision what is truly best for you. And Hashem works in mysterious ways. And I was supposed to interview a few other people, but I could not have interviewed a better person than is coming on today. And not only is she amazing, but our Torah extro is by the woman that she calls her rebbitzin. So I really enjoyed recording both parts of today's episode. I actually really had a good time on the Torah episode as well. I think it's a little different than the normal style I've used before, and it was really so much fun. So I want to tell you a little bit about these two women. Our first guest, the main health guest, is Adriana Kertzer. She's an attorney, She's an attorney, a community organizer, an author, and mental health advocate at the forefront of integrating psychedelic therapy in Jewish life. She is the founder of the Jewish Healing Society, an organization dedicated to ensuring a Jewish voice in psychedelic science and creating supportive spaces for Jews in the field. Adriana previously served as general counsel of Fluence, a leading psychedelic therapy training company, and co-founded Plant Medicine Law Group, a law firm focused on psychedelic infrastructure and policy. Her recent research has explored psychedelic-informed mental health responses following the October 7th attacks in Israel, particularly among the Nova Festival survivors. Her findings have been published in Tablet magazine, in the article The Worst Trip Ever, and in the academic journal Voices, The Art of Science and Psychotherapy. She's also the author of Fabulization, the Imaginary Brazil in Contemporary Film, Fashion, and Design. Through her work, Adriana bridges law, mental health, and Jewish tradition to advance conversations around healing, trauma, recovery, and the responsible integration of psychedelic therapies. Our next guest, the one she calls her rebbitzin, is Ginny Kafka. Ginny is a community builder, a Jewish communal fundraising professional. She's an art teacher. She sometimes assists a social worker for female patients going through psychedelic therapy. She has complex PTSD and has been immersed in her own psychedelic journey for the past 8 years. She's also known as the psychedelic yenta, making sure that there's a safe ecosystem for safe psychedelic work, and she has growing concerns with how that is being handled as psychedelic work becomes more popular. In her spare time, she knits, she does watercolors, she spends time with her kids and her husband. She's a Balat Teshuvah from the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia. Half of her family is from Grodno in Belarus. The other half is not Jewish and came to Virginia in the early 1600s and settled the Appalachia. I really enjoyed both conversations with both of these guests, and I'd really like to hear from you guys. I'd like to hear what you think. There has got to be people that every single one of you listening has who you can share this episode with, because trauma, mental health. That describes what this country has gone through probably since the beginning of the creation of the state. But again, we are resilient people, but for sure for the past 3 years. So I'm going to ask you guys again to please share this episode. In the 3 years I've been doing this podcast, with a year break sort of after the war where we put out very few episodes, the podcast has continued to grow. But I've been looking around at other podcasts within our same market, not the same type of podcast. I don't think anybody else out there is bridging health with Torah in the way that we are doing this here. But there are a number of Jewish podcasts, all of them excellent. And many of them, when I look at their YouTube channels, have 40,000 views just on YouTube. Now, most of our listeners are listening on Apple and Spotify, and that's fantastic. Please keep it going. But many of you are on YouTube, or people whose primary vehicle is YouTube. Please share this episode. And Ginny and I, a little bit later this week, are going to be recording a continuation. We're going to be recording an extra special conversation also surrounding part of Ginny's story and surrounding more of this issue of using psychedelics. And I have yet to figure out how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to ask as many of you as possible to follow us on YouTube, to share this episode. And I'm going to figure out how to give those of you that do that a special look at this private conversation that Ginny and I are going to have. I don't know, maybe I need to start a private group somehow for the people who are helping to share this and bring this work forward. I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to let you guys know, but we are going to be recording a little bit later this week. So I'm going to just ask you again to please follow us everywhere, and please share this with anyone that you think could benefit. Wishing you nothing but healing if you are suffering, and wishing our country healing, and that we should have an end to this war that's been really ongoing. Because I don't know about you guys, but my son's in his 8th Miluim, so I know we're still at war. But wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom, and just keep smiling and keep being the resilient, happy country that I know we are, even though there is so much suffering going on. Hey guys, welcome back to Holy Health. I am so excited today to hear what my guest Adriana Kertzer has to say. We have been trying to do this for months. We've been trying to make it work. We've been scheduling. Someone had a conflict. We needed to change it a few times. Holidays, Shavuot. She even agreed to start 15 minutes later today because I got stuck in the Haredi demonstration leaving Jerusalem. So it's really been a while. And not only that, it was your friend Marissa, right? You're friends with Marissa.
Shout out to Marissa Feinberg.
Absolutely. So she's the one that hooked us up, because about probably 2 years ago, she had hooked me up with somebody else. This is ongoing for 2 years that I'm trying to put out an episode about today's topic, which is really psychedelic therapy. And I've been trying to make it work, and she was trying to help me make it work with a few different people until she realized one of her friends is very involved. So I am so excited to have you on today.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me here. I have enjoyed listening to some of your prior podcasts. So love how your style is so casual and warm. I love the weaving in of the Torah analysis at the end with your brother, I believe it is.
It's sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes your brother. And so for someone like me who's been at the intersection of the conversation of Jews and altered states, and with this component of health, I couldn't imagine a better podcast to be on.
I am so excited. So I feel like we have so many things to break down before we get to the final piece, which is what you ultimately actually do, and how you're involved with psychedelic therapy. What I'd like to ask you first, could you just tell the listeners what psychedelic therapy is? And
Absolutely. So I want to start with, I guess, dedicating this conversation, since I understand in more religious circles, we have the right to dedicate a study session. And so I consider this a study session that I would like to dedicate to a group of women who call themselves the psychedelic yentas. And these are Jewish women that I could not live without. They allow me to be the human and the professional in the psychedelic space that I am. And so I want to dedicate today's conversation to Erica Zelfand, Erica Siegel, Erica Buckman, Ginny Adams Kafka, Hadass Alterman, Gabriela Polar Buzali, and Tali Avron. So without these women, I would not be where I am today. And so who is a lawyer to define what psychedelic therapy is? But here we go, right? Psychedelic therapy in its simplest sense is an experience with a psychedelic with the intention to achieve some form of healing. How that takes place, legal context, illegal context, group, individual, that is something that we can discuss. But really, in its core, it's the use of certain mind-altering substances in the pursuit of healing.
Okay, great. So can you elaborate a little on what some of these substances may be? I know it's very obvious to you. I know what some of them are, but some of the listeners may not be familiar. Not everybody was alive in the 60s. I know I was only born in 69. So what might some of these substances be?
Right. So we have classic psychedelics, we have empathogens, and we also have dissociatives. So let's start with a dissociative that is legal. We have ketamine. Ketamine at higher doses can have a therapeutic effect, and that it is a classic dissociative, but in higher doses, it can have a psychedelic experience to it. We also have empathogens. So the substance MDMA is a substance that many of your listeners may understand as ecstasy, which, depending on the set and setting in which it's consumed, will have very different effects. So you can take MDMA and go to a rave and have a very wonderful experience dancing, which can in itself be cathartic, or you can take it in a therapeutic context, which might involve some component of talking, some component of inward-facing work. And then you have classic psychedelics that, again, very different experiences on each one, but whether it be LSD or Ibogaine or DMT, can also have therapeutic benefits depending on how they are administered.
Okay, so I feel like I need to ask you this question. I'm a child of the 70s. I was born in 69. And, I'd like to think I wasn't thinking anything about any type of drug in the 70s but I remember it being discussed like in high school, so maybe it was the early 80s, people talking about why LSD was so dangerous and why it isn't used anymore. And that people in the 60s who took LSD years later, they could be having flashbacks and, why you don't lick stamps because maybe the stamps have acid on them. And so how could it be that something, or maybe it was an urban legend, maybe that was what they used to scare children not into taking LSD. But I remember hearing that there were so many reasons why people stopped using LSD because they found that it was really causing problems later on. So I'm just curious to know.
It's interesting because I grew up in São Paulo, Brazil. So the whole Nixon era effect on drug education was not my cultural experience growing up. The eggs in the frying pan that I hear about from people in the United
Because you're too young. You're 10 years younger than me.
No, several people around me that grew up in the States, obviously talk about this. So just to say that growing up in Brazil, we had our own kind of attitudes towards substances. But I think that the best summary that I can offer is that leading up to the Nixon administration and then during the Nixon administration, leading up to the Nixon administration, there were many, many, many studies looking into the potential of psychedelics for healing. There's actually a very notable case of a Holocaust survivor being treated with LSD in the Netherlands for PTSD from Auschwitz. Haketzenik, which is the author's name that he was known by in Israel, was the individual who was treated. And there's a fabulous documentary by Asaf Lapid going into that pre-prohibition history of where science was heading. in exploring these different substances in therapeutic settings. There were also experiments with psychedelics in the CIA, so the MK Ultra program that was also experimenting with how these substances could be used for other reasons. But I think it's easy to say that during the Nixon era, prohibition set in, the Controlled Substances Act set in, the backlash against this correlation between the hippies and counterculture and substances. That became the law in the form of the Controlled Substances Act, which moved almost all of these substances into Schedule 1, saying that they had basically no health benefit. And so what we are now seeing is a process through which many individuals of different backgrounds are saying, well, that categorization was not quite right, and we need to pursue the science and the discussions that help us challenge that categorization and make these substances available again. Now, they never quite went away. We have what we call the underground. So there's been the psychedelic underground that people like me have to give a lot of credit to, and understand that many of us today in the legal conversation owe a debt of gratitude and acknowledgement to individuals in the underground who did not stop experimenting, who continued creating protocols, who continued creating new molecules. So there's a very interesting tension in psychedelic science and psychedelic history between legality and illegality, exploration and healing. And I'm here for it.
Okay, so before I'm going to get into how you actually did get into this field, but just to understand a little bit about these substances, are they all created in a lab, or are some of them coming from plants, or some of them, just so I can understand, are some being created by, I don't know, pharmaceutical companies? Like I myself, I actually don't know the answer to these questions. So
yeah. So some come from nature and then are consumed with minor alterations. Some are completely synthetic, and some are synthetic versions, let's say, that were inspired by nature. And so the conversation today includes that entire range, as well as many conversations about what does it mean to create a synthetic analog, for example, of a medicine that has a traditional use. So the whole range applies.
Okay, so why would you pick one over another? Or maybe that's not your field because you are a lawyer. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When somebody comes, I guess we should really backtrack and talk about why would somebody want to, let's talk about that first. Why would somebody want to have psychedelic therapy? Who is this for? Is this for you or me? Or, who exactly is coming for psychedelic therapy?
So in preparation for today's conversation,
I went through, I went on a psychedelic trip last night. No, I'm joking.
No, I realized that I think I was ready to speak in I statements a little bit more than I ever have.
Okay.
And so this will be the first time that I speak on a podcast or recording a little bit more from a personal perspective. So
as long as you're okay with that, because I can cut anything.
I am. So. It is my delight at this point to do that.
Okay.
So I think for me,
mm-hmm.
there was a refusal to accept the answers that I was receiving. When I have faced my own mental health struggles and my own desires for healing, I realized I was not going to settle for the information that I was receiving or the limits that I was being communicated. And I think that for those of us, for example, who are now women in perimenopause or menopause, there's a very similar conversation taking place that many of your listeners would probably associate with, which is, all of a sudden you enter a situation in your life where the mainstream knowledge or the education that your doctors received when they were in school, or the limits of what is prescribed, or even the limits of what is discussed, feel insufficient. And so just like a woman can say, I'm not liking that my brain fog is not being taken seriously, and I am not being, my doctor isn't discussing the 360 reality of this phase of life that I'm in. There's no difference in my mind between that and what happened to me when it came to mental health. So I think it's a personality thing where I am deeply curious, deeply obstinate. I can have a tendency to bulldog, which is when I bite down on something and don't let go until I get some satisfying information back. And I think that as an Ashkenazi Jewish woman in New York, plugged into certain conversations, having been a part of the cannabis community, there was just an access to innovation and to conversations that other people would consider taboo, and access to people who were a part of certain cultures that were connected to the psychedelic space. And so I think that I was not going to settle for the answers that I was receiving as to what was available for me in terms of healing. And then the difference really began to surface between what can one do to placate a mental health situation or stabilize a mental health situation. And here I want to say I'm absolutely in favor of medication. I think medication in the forms of SSRIs and other compounds are essential for people's safety, for people's well-being. And two things can be true at the same time. They do not help you get to the root of what might be happening. So I think that in my life, there was the stabilization that was needed. There was the holding that was needed. There was the beginning of certain forms of safety. And then the real desire to be like, where is this really coming from? And the chutzpah to say, I want to go there, which, again, no judgment, because I'm surrounded by people who have said to me, like, I don't really want to go there right now. I don't really want to know where my anxiety comes from. I'm not ready to know where my depression comes from. And I respect that. But for those of us who wanted to fix things from the root out, then I think the journey leads into these deeper explorations. And to your question about what substances for what, that's exactly it. It becomes an exploration of what experiences based on descriptions and the profiles of these different compounds might speak to one person's search. So everybody that engages in psychedelic therapy is going to have a different order, a different rhythm, a different approach, a different way that they resonate with different options, not just in terms of what substance, but also in terms of what setting. Some people might gravitate towards a group experience. I'm someone who doesn't, for a whole host of reasons. So I seek out very, very safe individual experiences. And so it's a 5-dimensional analysis. I'd say it's, substance, setting, place, where, legal, illegal. It's a very complex analysis that people go through to figure out how to enter this conversation.
Okay, so just back to this question as well. Who is this for? Who is the person that's coming for psychedelic therapy? You did kind of lead me to believe it could be anybody, meaning it could even be a perimenopausal, menopausal woman, that it could even be for this type of person. But in general, who is seeking out these experiences?
So let's list it, but not with any sense of hierarchy.
Okay.
Obviously, we have clinical trials. So we have public calls that are put out into the world that set from a place that is testing a specific substance that says, hey, we are looking for people with, and then they list the condition. and they disclose what substance, will be used, and people can have the experience in the legal context of a clinical trial. You also have the situation where something like ketamine, which is a Schedule 3 substance, is provided off-label as a psychedelic therapy, right? So a legal experience that anyone in the United States can procure, usually paying out of pocket at a private clinic to undergo that experience. You then have, in the United States and in certain countries, legal destinations. So a person can fly to Oregon, a person can fly to Colorado and have a state legal psilocybin experience, individual or group. Or you can go to the Netherlands and work with truffles. You then have places like Switzerland or Australia, or in the state of São Paulo, where a doctor can prescribe and the state can allow the use of a psychedelic therapy. You also have the underground, which is situations where people experience these substances in a non-legal or an illegal setting. You also have situations where people can experience these substances in church settings. Some of these psychedelic churches have explicit permission or have obtained the right to serve these substances through litigation. And some are going to take a defensive approach. So they are serving and they will argue in court that they have a religious right to serve these substances. And Jewish psychedelic culture is evolving so that I would say, all of these options that I've described, maybe a little less in the clinical trial, but all of these options that I described nowadays are developing some kind of Jewish flavor, or there are communities that are bubbling up that are Jewish and serving medicine in a whole host of these different scenarios in Israel and the diaspora.
Okay, so it sounds though like most of the people seeking these experiences are people that have some type of a mental health challenge. And I know that it's being studied in relationship to PTSD. So you are saying it's not just that.
Right. I'd say that, you have exclusions of who this is not for. And this is very important to make sure that people are doing a proper screening before they enter into this experience. Because people, for example, with a history of schizophrenia in their family, will not be, that is not an appropriate fit. And different substances can be, can have other things that are screened out that are not recommended. But I'd say that it's not just for someone who has a DSM-5 diagnosis. There's something called the betterment of well people. There's also the end of life psychedelic conversation. So where can psychedelics enter the dying process? And I think that is a conversation that's very important.
Yes.
I think that there are important conversations about Jewish ritual and Jewish identity and these substances. So I think that obviously the scientific route, the route through which substances obtain FDA approval, requires, right, a problem to be fixed. But I think the reality is that these medicines are also available for the betterment of well people.
Okay. You said a lot of really interesting things, and I'll try to break them down so we can speak about each one of them. I know, obviously PTSD is a very big thing to us here in Israel, as we have so many soldiers, and not just soldiers, families of soldiers, anybody who's gone through the war on top of, 3 years of COVID. There's a lot of people suffering from PTSD in so many different ways. And so I think that it's something to be said that this is one of the avenues in which people are seeking this experience. And I want to know that what does one expect? Like, how does this work, right? Let's use PTSD as an example. A person comes in and takes whichever substance, and we're going to talk about who is handled in addition to the state, who they might go to to be able to experience this. We'll talk about that in a minute. But someone with PTSD comes in and it's decided whichever substance they're going to get. What's actually going on? Like, can you describe what's actually going on, that how it may help them with their PTSD? Does my question make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I am not the best situated person to describe the mental or chemical phenomenon. For that, I'll introduce you to much smarter people on those fronts. But I think that what I can do is I can share an example that I think will resonate with your audience as to what this healing process for someone with PTSD can look like.
Okay.
So there are currently 4 different initiatives taking Israeli soldiers with PTSD, Israeli veterans with PTSD, for psychedelic healing in legal destinations. So these are projects that are Israeli and Galut collaborations, where the desire is to bring individuals to where different forms of psychedelic therapies are legal, and create a very culturally appropriate, well-trained, well-held environment for them to be able to process their experience. And so one project, for example, that is led by Dr. Joyce Braverman in collaboration with Omri Galili and the artist Tomer Peretz, of which Erica Zelfand has been a participant, brings Israeli veterans to Mexico for psilocybin therapy. And as a part of that experience, the individuals that are working in the retreat are trained to understand that specific demographic. They will be trained in trip sitting and also have additional members that speak Hebrew, that have the requisite cultural knowledge. And then there's a really interesting wraparound holding through art therapy and support through something called the 8 Project, which this artist Tomer Peretz created, that provides these veterans with art therapy, a life coach, a psychiatrist, and additional accompaniment, plus potential additional time in an artist residency, plus, to make sure that it's not just about the drug. It's about the entire experience of people feeling held, of appropriate culturally competent care, and then recognizing that psychedelic healing doesn't live in a vacuum. That's the most complicated part about this conversation, is that people want to talk just about the substance, but there's a whole host of socioeconomic and psycho-spiritual factors that have to be considered around a person who seeks this kind of healing. So while I'm not the best person to describe how psychedelics work on your default mode network and the neurosomatic connections, there are amazing people for all of that. What I am in the business of is thinking about psychedelic infrastructure. So what is the delivery of care? What are the components of delivery of care that have to exist for people to have access to psychedelic therapy? And then in the Jewish context, what is safe? What is culturally competent care, especially in an era of rising anti-Semitism? So that project that I just shared, one example of, is one in which I'd say a life cycle of experience is being considered around the consumption of the medicine, and not just the medicine. And this wonderful reality of Jews going wherever in the world they need to go to obtain that level of healing. So seeing a project that includes fundraising from the Mexican Jewish community and the Miami Jewish community to bring over veterans to Mexico, to have a Russian American doctor working together with a Mexican doctor, to me, it's just an example of the best of what our people are capable of. Unfortunately, as a result of trauma, but it still is a beautiful example of what we are capable of.
Okay, so that leads me to the question then, and you semi-answered it, of who should be, I guess, at the forefront of leading, if we call it journeys or whatever the psychedelic experience is. Should it be a doctor? Should it be a psychologist, a psychiatrist? Should it be a health coach? Should it be, who should be involved with leading these journeys, if that's what I should call them? I know that term from a friend of mine who's a psychologist who was involved with, because I do know there are studies, and I do know there is, I don't know if it's underground training going on in Israel, but I do know, and this has been going for a few years already. Like, this is a conversation that I've been trying to have for over 2 years. And it just worked out that it gets to be you and I, which makes me really happy.
And Israel is undoubtedly, I think, in many regards, the tip of the spear when it comes to psychedelic science for a few reasons. One is the degree to which Israel has a psychedelic culture is unbelievable. There's a reason why the group Safe Heart was able to mobilize over 400 psychedelically informed mental health professionals to help assist the Nova survivors, many of whom were on a psychedelic. So potentially over 80% of survivors were on a psychedelic, such as LSD, 2CB, and MDMA. And this call for support received such a high number of individuals ready to help because Israel is a psychedelic culture. There's the psytrance culture. There's the experimentation that goes on at raves. There's the experimentation that goes on after the army when people travel to different places. There's an openness to psychedelics in Israel as a population that is incredibly high. And that is not limited to secular Israelis. You have a reality in Israel where there are at least 4 different types of Hasidic ayahuasca circles. That is different flavors of Hasidic ayahuasca gatherings where the music is going to be different. The inclination is going to be different. And I could go on and on and on. Israel is also the site of clinical trials. Israel is also the site of above ground and underground training. So just to say that I think that given the political climate in the world, it's hard sometimes to find avenues through which to sing the praises of Israeli psychedelic science. And that is something that I work very hard to do in my personal life, my professional life, and also in my social life. I think I prefer answering your question by saying who should not be,
Okay.
right?
I like it.
Because who should, it, to me, is easy. It depends on there are many different avenues. It could be a wonderful clinical trial. It could be a wonderful private clinic. It could be a wonderful shaman. It could be, right? It's easy for me to discuss who I think should be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very clear on who I think should not be.
Perfect.
People who have just had a couple of experiences themselves. That's it. Should not be serving medicine to others.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that you with your friends, if you've had a few more experiences, can't have a good time helping out your friends. But putting yourself out there or putting up a shingle and saying, I am here to assist you in your healing, very different. Coaches have no business helping people with trauma. Just, that's a fact. Don't meddle in a topic that you are not trained and capacitated to handle. People who are not doing, quote, their own work should not be holding space for others because things will come up. People who do not have a peer support network with whom they can discuss issues that come up and how to handle them, right? So getting advice from similarly situated practitioners as to how to do something. I do not think couples should host medicine experiences for others. You see a lot of boyfriend-girlfriend tag teaming or husband and wife teams. And a lot of people get upset at me for saying that. But I'll be explicit as to why I do not think that that is a good idea. Because husbands and wives or girlfriends and girlfriends, whatever you want to call it, will not push back on each other with the same clarity and boundaries as non-affiliated individuals will. I don't think people who want something from someone else should sit for them. So if someone is a private banker, they should not be taking their clients into psychedelic ceremony in order to, believe me, all of this is based on stories that I know.
Wow.
If you are fundraising for an organization, you should not be giving psychedelics to the individuals who are donors to that organization.
Wow.
And so, unfortunately, in the psychedelic space, we have many, 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 many stories of this being the case. I'll keep going. People should disclose what you will be consuming. There are very well-known practitioners who give their substances special names, and some of them are very popular in Israel. They will give their substances names like heart opener, and people will not know what they are taking. Informed consent. Know what you are taking. That is an essential component of the experience, whether it is legal or illegal. Full informed consent of what you are taking, having the chance to understand that substance, do your research, discuss it with your doctors, discuss it with your psychiatrist. That is all a part of this reality. And so the last thing I'll end with is there's a reason why psychedelic cults are popular. So the mixing of these delicate altered states that leave you more open, that leave you more sensitive, together with some kind of nefarious influence structure is common. And so I think we as Jews may have a tendency to think like, we're Jews, we're not as susceptible to cults. Believe me, from my own experience in my family, people are susceptible to cults, and we need to learn about them preemptively and understand that that they exist even for our community.
Okay, so I liked what you said, which was, I guess, is important to know because this is what made me aware to ask this. You talked about how I guess these substances leave you open either to healing or to not treatment, but having taken it, I guess it's expanded your mind, which leaves you open. It sounds like absolutely like you should be processing, and maybe this is what happens, and I didn't ask you the right way, that people go and they have these experiences, so their minds are opened, and then afterwards, like when they come down, they process the experience with a psychologist or with a person trained to deal with trauma or something like that. Is that what happens?
Absolutely. And the openness, the sensitivity, the vulnerability, the suggestibility, whatever you want to call it, that can be the case during the high, and it can also be the case and is the case after. So common terms that people will hear are preparation and integration, being incredibly important adjuncts to a psychedelic experience. So preparation is literally what it sounds like. How are you preparing for this experience? And that is physically, that is emotionally. How are you preparing, whether it's changing your diet and according to the traditions of the medicine that you will sit with, whether it's preparing by sitting and really thinking about your intentions and working with someone if you have a hard time setting intentions. How do you do all of that before the experience? And then integration is also what it sounds like, which is how do you integrate that the thoughts, the feelings, the realizations, the ideas, the opinions, the memories that surfaced or were catalyzed during a therapeutic session or a ceremony. How do you then integrate it and synthesize it and blend it in with your real life? And so healing is complicated because sometimes something can seem very simple and very clear during a psychedelic journey. And the complexity is then, how do I take that lesson or how do I take that memory and really weave it back into my daily choices or my personality or my nervous system or my predispositions or my biases. That's a very complicated process. And depending on the substance, that sensitivity and that process can look very, very different for quite a long period of time for some.
Okay. And that you brought up an important point when you spoke about Nova before. And I remember saying after October 7th in talking to people that you have to imagine these people were taking psychedelic drugs, most of them, because that's why you go to these parties. So you're watching what's going on. You see people coming out of the sky. You don't know if what you're seeing is real or a hallucination. You see people around you being killed. I imagine you don't know if it's real, if it's a hallucination. So I can't even imagine how would you use these substances again to try to help people get over that?
Those are complicated stories or complicated, fact patterns. I think I will answer that by saying that people were taking different substances, and different substances have different effects. You also have
You can tell that I've probably never taken any of these substances. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just acting like I do.
Exactly. So different substances, different effects. The reality of adrenaline kicking in modifies, interrupts, changes the experience. I have supported the projects that have studied and supported these individuals, and I have seen, even though I didn't memorize the data, that really different people on different substances had different degrees of negative experiences correlated with those substances. And so someone on LSD did not have the same experience as someone on ketamine or cannabis or MDMA. And so it's important for us to read the science that is coming out and the longitudinal studies that are coming out around that population. But I did become friends with one of the survivors, and just hearing that one person's experience opened my eyes to the level of complexity of that morning. Also because consumption for many was timed to peak at 6:30 a.m. So that is also something to sit with. But it's a valid debate, and it's a valid question whether someone wants to dip back into substances in order to heal from another circumstance with substances. And I think that's a valid question that I think has to be answered on a case-to-case basis, so that we avoid depicting substances as the solution to everything.
Okay, that's a very good answer. That's a very good answer. So let me steer this back towards what it is you actually do as a lawyer involved in the psychedelic space. What is it that you actually do? And I understand you shared a little bit of your background with us, that this was something that I guess you used in your own life to help you. So how did you now get involved, and is it being legalized? I mean, I guess you said it is legal in Colorado, and it was legal in, where did you say, Nevada? You said two different places in America. Mexico, a few different places. Mexico's not in America.
A few different places.
Yeah.
So I was reading the weekly Parsha for this week in preparation for this conversation, and there was a bit in it that I found so applicable. So Moses is leading the Jews away from Mount Sinai to the land of Canaan, and they're complaining that they don't like the manna, or the manna isn't enough, and they want meat. They want juicy, probably grilled, delicious meat. And that complaint, I think, brings us back to where we started this conversation, right? Someone like me complaining that they didn't want the solutions that were being given to them, right? So I think complaining is not a bad thing sometimes. It can be the beginning of innovation. It can be the beginning of entrepreneurship. And so I think that where psychedelic science is today is based on a complaint, right? Thank God for SSRIs. Thank God for the medicines that we have today, but they're not exactly fill in the blank, right? They're not exactly everything that we want for all of the conditions and forms of suffering in the world. So the solution, right? God said to Moses, I'm going to do something. And so we're in the process of the I'm going to do something. We have different forms of this conversation evolving. We have the FDA approval process, or in Brazil, the Anvisa approval process of these medicines. And in different countries, different processes. You have in Israel, medical cannabis is a part of the health ministry's purview. So you have these legal routes being explored. You also have, at least in the United States, state legal routes being explored, where a substance remains illegal on the federal level and legal on a state level. And that tension between state and federal is normal in the United States. It's a headache for people doing business, but it's a normal tension in the way that the United States was structured. And so you have states like Oregon and Colorado and New Mexico and others coming online to get state level infrastructure in place for different medicines. And then you have the fully illegal realm and you have the ceremonial realm. And so, you know, the meat is coming down, you know, in many different forms. And what was interesting in the Parsha is that there's also too much of it, right? There's already, we see the gluttony and the plague and things kind of going wrong. And so for those of us like me who are involved in psychedelic infrastructure, thinking through these deliveries of care, these systems, we are also aware of where things are already going wrong. So ketamine addiction, death because of ketamine, overuse of psychedelics. So people who are going from high to high to high to high to high without processing, without holding. Bad actors in terms of psychedelic trip sitters, right? So I think it's just very interesting how this Parsha makes in one simple arc, the complaining, right? The need for the need for more, the need for saying this isn't it. God being like, I got you. I'm going to send some stuff down, right? But then immediately that also identification of the problems that are going to come, or the overuse, or the too muchedness of something. And that is my reality as an attorney in the psychedelic space. And on top of that, I think you need to have an awareness of what does happen in the underground. What do we have to understand from the illegal side of this ecosystem? And in that regard, having come from the art world and having worked in Brazilian capital markets with Brazilian companies and growing up in Brazil, I feel like I am in a very privileged position to understand complexity, to understand gray markets, to understand the gradations between when something is glatt kosher and completely unkosher and everything in between. That's been my reality.
So do you represent the company or the people who are wishing to get approval to be able to do this? Are you representing the federal government? Like, who is it that you're actually representing?
So I represent currently a company that does psychedelic therapy training within clinical trials or to mental health professionals in general. And in my capacity as a lawyer running Plant Medicine Law Group, I assisted companies. Our tagline was, whatever is legal now, we will help you build. So I assisted nonprofits and companies that were trying to build something legal within the loopholes or the gray areas or the kosher areas that were available to them in this reality. And sometimes that means it's a US company doing business in Jamaica, or US company doing business in Mexico, or it's a nonprofit providing education. There's a lot of risk analysis that goes into this conversation. But a lot of times it feels more like a well thought out Talmudic debate rather than kind of a messy. So I'm a little bit the Rashi of things. I'm not as liberal as Hillel. And so it's weird that, in my family, I'm considered such a nut for being a psychedelic lawyer. And in the community, I'm considered quite conservative by my peers in terms of what I will and will not represent.
It's funny because I was hearing about the loopholes and I was thinking, oh yeah, that sounds like a Jewish thing. We're always trying to find the loopholes. So
always. And so
yeah.
that's why so many psychedelic attorneys are Jewish. But there's definitely a culture of risk analysis. And then now we are a few years into this industry, and different lawyers have different reputations for doing different kinds of work and for having different approaches to risk.
Okay, good. I have a few more questions for you. So tell me a little bit about this Jewish Psychedelic Society, I guess it is.
So Jewish Healing Society.
Oh, excuse me.
Back in 2016, just for fun, I created something called Jew Who Tokes. And it was something that grew out of a research project that I was starting in the cannabis space. I was researching the changing aesthetics and the changing presentation of cannabis products. And over and over and over again, I kept meeting Jews. And all of a sudden, it became a fascination. What is it? Kind of like Nixon said in one of his famous tapes that he was recorded, Bob, what is it about the Jews and cannabis? It started off as that. And then over the years, it morphed to include psychedelics. And then it morphed into something else after October 7th. So Jew Who Tokes had been a light-hearted exploration of Jews and cannabis and psychedelic culture. And after October 7th, with the evidence of anti-Semitism in both of these industries being what it is, and people's sense of isolation and despair and confusion, two different organizations were born out of that moment and out of a morphing of Jew Who Tokes. So we now today have Jews and Weed, which is a professional association for Jews and cannabis, led by a wonderful individual named Jordan Eisenstadt, who has wonderful supporters. And I gifted to them my base Instagram for Jew Who Tokes. They've renamed it and they host incredible events at all of the cannabis conferences that take place. So Jewish Healing Society is really a messy, Hamish, I don't know what it's going to be when it grows up, project through which I connect people, through which I support projects, through which I shine a light on people. It is literally an attempt for me to make my network available to other Jews in the psychedelic space. And I consider it my tzedakah. So if I use my skills and my time to obsessively connect people, to shine a light on Israeli researchers, to shine a light on Israeli psychedelic science, to really promote individuals in any way that I can. And it's a bittersweet reality how it was born, because yes, it was born from Jew Who Tokes, which gave me so much pleasure and so much joy, but it was also instigated by a BDS attempt in the psychedelic space. So there was an Instagram account that was created with the intention of bringing the BDS movement to the psychedelic space. And they started creating lists of Jews and lists of Zionists. And I just remember, joking with a friend that, wow, people accuse us of being a cabal. I'm going to build the cabal. Like, or you're going to try to list us. I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it for good. And I'm going to do it better than you ever could. And I'm going to do it in a way that shines a light on the incredible things that the people from our tribe are doing that, quite honestly, span the breadth of this conversation, everything from ceremonial to scientific. And so it really is my hope to allow people to find each other. It's been amazing to see what is possible when you connect a firecracker Venezuelan Jew with a firecracker Tel Avivi, woman. It is unbelievable what comes out of it. And it's also important to have intra and inter-religious dialogues. So to make sure that frum Jews have access to resources that might be available in secular psychedelic circles a little bit more easily. And so that's the kind of messy, I don't know what it's going to be when it grows up, hope for this project.
Okay, I like that. So you've mentioned cannabis a couple of times. Is cannabis considered a psychedelic? Because I wouldn't have put that on that list.
Cannabis is considered a psychedelic, as Dr. Julie Holland, a wonderful psychopharmacologist, loves reminding us. And so at different doses, yes. And there are cannabis psychedelic clinics that exist in Colorado. A wonderful ally, Daniel McQueen, runs one and does trainings. And so, yes, plant medicine, psychedelic medicine, however you choose to describe these substances, there is a way in which people can revisit their assumption and their biases and perhaps reconsider how these different substances may fit into their lives.
Okay, back to this PTSD. I have two more questions about this. I'm almost done. We could go on for 3 hours. We could turn this into Huberman, but I don't want to do that. People can we're going to tell them how to contact you and where else they can find more information if they want. But I do want to understand, why do we need to take our Israeli soldiers out of Israel if so much work is being done in the country using psychedelics?
So I think the simplest answer is yes, there are clinical trials that take place in Israel, but they do not exist in the volume that is needed to address the issue. And these substances are not legal to be dispersed in the way that they can be in other destinations. So international travel is required for the groups that are going to Mexico for Ibogaine. International travel is required for the groups that are going to Mexico for psilocybin. And there's potentially a group going to Colorado as well for psilocybin.
Okay, and I'm not going to ask you to get more detailed about that because I find it interesting that it's different substances, and I guess we can't understand why the decisions of who goes where is being made by somebody in charge. You did talk about church groups, and I assume that means synagogues or Indian ceremonies or whatever it is where they are legally allowed to use these substances. So if somebody was interested in trying something, they could look for a local church group or a local synagogue or somebody, and they're legally allowed to disperse this even when the government says it's illegal?
There are no Jewish groups that have the explicit permission to serve these medicines. The groups that do have a Christian root to them. So Santo Daime and União do Vegetal. Or there is a Native American church that also is not Jewish, that has permission to serve peyote. Aside from that, you have the groups that are building defensible, or what they feel are defensible arguments in court, that they're sacraments, that these substances are sacraments that they require, that their religion requires them to take. It is a very fascinating debate to get 2 Jews and 10 opinions on whether Jews would ever qualify for the Religion and Freedom and Restoration Act argument, because it is my opinion that we cannot say that these medicines are essential to our religious practice, because we have been Jews for millennia without them. However, there is an argument that could be made that these substances become a part of new rituals and new practices, and there's psychedelic kiruv and all of those other conversations. But to fit us as a people and our tradition into what can sometimes feel like the narrow interpretation of the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act is a debate that I think merits its own podcast with 4 or 5 brilliant minds. But there are Jewish ayahuasca ceremonies and Jewish psilocybin ceremonies with the of different types for different audiences. And so I know that there are groups that are collaborating now with individuals from Brazil, that the intention is for the Jews to benefit from the indigenous wisdom that exists in my country. And so there's a very nice and organic, genuine partnership that's forming. But then the container and the experience and the music is Jewish. And the food is kosher and it's Shomer Shabbat. So there's a lot of innovation that is happening, and people are creating these cross-cultural moments of exchange.
Okay, well, that's really beautiful. I know that you need to go. I've kept you on long enough. So my final question to you is, and it actually seems almost obvious with this subject that we're talking about, because I think that this is probably a spiritual experience for people. But what does spirituality mean to you?
Spirituality to me is a realm of understanding and experience that bridges the mundane or the everyday and the physical and the holy.
Okay. I think that that is a great description. Everybody has their own description, and I really like that. And I think that there's such an element of spirituality, and that's why I can't wait to hear what the Torah person is going to say, because if this is being used, and I know this because I know of at least one rabbi that 100% has done one of these Jewish journeys. I mean, totally religious, and I know that there are people doing this. So I'm looking forward to hearing how this will be brought into Torah. And then maybe that person will be able to find a way for it to be used to go argue with whoever you need to argue in terms of the religious, cultural, whatever the argument was you said was needed. And I'm not going to keep you on to ask where people can find you, because everybody, all of the links are going to be right there. You just need to go into the description, and you will find all the links for Adriana there. But I want to thank you so much for making this happen and for being so gracious with your time.
This was a pleasure. And we spoke a little bit about preparation and integration. And for me, Jewish tradition has both been the scaffolding for much of my preparation for these experiences and the scaffolding for my integration. So I will never forget the role that Lech Lecha has played in acting like a key to a very, very important experience. And I continue to be amazed by how Jewish ethics and Jewish community, even sometimes in its friction, is an important part of my integration and thinking about what is my life, what is important, what is healing, and what greater good can we do in this life, both for ourselves and for our tribe. And so I think that, everybody's going to think about it a little bit differently, but there's great value in our tradition to apply to these moments.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's have a quick chat about hydrogen water. I'm sure many of you did not get a chance to listen to the episode I had with Dr. Paul Batterio on the benefits of this delicious water. Hydrogen water, it might seem weird, right? Because hydrogen, water, H2O. I'm going to link our episode, and I suggest you guys go back and listen to the many, many, many healing benefits of this stuff. But I want to tell you on a personal level, this helps decrease inflammation. It helps with cellular repair and simple things. Stomach bothering you a little bit? Drink some hydrogen water. Feeling like you can't really go to the bathroom? Drink some hydrogen water. This stuff not only works, it works pretty quickly. The first week after I got this bottle, I was being really, really nice and I was sharing it with people. I was bringing it into my office and I was giving it to every single one of my patients to try. And people instantly were energized when they were drinking some of this water. Recently, I haven't been as nice and I've been keeping it at my house. But when you open this, the one thing you have to make sure to do is open it pretty carefully. It won't explode. I did ask that question, could it explode? But it makes a very, very loud noise. So you have to release the gas. Did you guys hear that? That was the gas releasing. And it's absolutely delicious. And I have a special code and a discount for you guys. I will link the website in the show notes, but it's Echo Hydrogen Water. The code is very simple. It's Holy Health. Use it, get your discount, and try this delicious water. You will not regret it. Hey guys, I'm so excited to have Ginny here with me today. She is a friend of Adriana's. In fact, Adriana called you her rebbitzin, you should just know. And this whole episode has been such a long time coming. The whole episode was something I've been wanting to do for the past couple years. So I am super excited to hear what Ginny has to tell us about the Torah perspective on psychedelics.
Well, thank you for having me. I am not a rebbitzin, but I love that Adriana references me is that she's at our house for, the high holidays and Shabbos from time to time, and she's family as far as I'm concerned. So I want to say that it's interesting when people look into the Torah and they want to find evidence of psychedelics and evidence of cannabis. I think what you'll actually view is just evidence of Jews trying to be Jews and doing the special thing that we do in the universe, which is to think deeply and to try to feel fully and to try to attune ourselves with the flow of Hashem's being in the universe. And I think that's a lot. There are not very, very direct references to cannabis or psychedelics in the Torah, but there are references to elevated and altered states of consciousness. And there is a profound use of everything from gemstones and different herbs and different things used to elevate spiritual practice throughout the whole Torah. And then there are these experiences in the story of the Torah that have a very psychedelic theme to them, or just are psychedelic in nature. Receiving the Torah, when you look directly into the Torah's language about what that experience was like for the Jews to be somewhere and have this mountain hover over them. And when they received the Torah, the experience was so powerful that their souls shot back and then flicked back into their body. I mean, anybody that has done a deep dive medicine experience can look at the burning bush. Devorah spoke about being in communication with the cosmos. And so there's all of these experiences in the Torah that are consciousness altering, that describe a consciousness experience. And then we have, modern day evidence that certain things were used at certain times in Jewish history. Specifically, there's evidence that cannabis was used ceremonially in an archaeological dig in the West Bank. So there's evidence of these things. And then there are also rabbis that speak about, Yosef's robes and what they were made from, and all of these things that infer use of what we all like to call them plant medicines today. I don't know that that's the language.
It's so interesting because I never thought about that. Now, I've personally never experienced psychedelics, which is fine. But even if you think about the dreams that Yosef had or all of these different things, you really could interpret things or see things in a different light. So that's just a fascinating way of looking at things.
Absolutely. And then I think that there are different traditions within the Jewish canon that lend themselves to the hypothesis that plant medicines could have been used. I mean, there's zero evidence to say, oh, well, the Hasidim in the late 1600s and the early 1700s in the woods, they were herbalists, right? You can infer from that they probably made mushrooms, but we don't necessarily have evidence per se that they absolutely were using these. What we do have, though, is a long tradition of figuring out how we can elevate our avoda, our work to connect to God. Even if you go walk into a synagogue and it's Shabbos and they bring the Torah scroll, we decorate things, and when you think about the temple times, there was incense being burned, and it was a crazy blend of spices. We don't know all of them today.
Right. I figured that Torah was something. I don't know.
Yeah, the Ketoret. So yeah, I think that we have a faith and a history that dives deep into everything we do. Why wouldn't? I'm sure that Jews have partaken in consciousness altering substances and had spiritual experiences with them throughout all time, as have most other cultures as well.
I know that people have said that Indian culture is some of the ceremonies that were done. I know I have a friend who, I might have mentioned this in the podcast with Adriana. You would think, since we only recorded it about 2 weeks ago, I would remember exactly what I said, but I'm 57 now. So like sometimes I forget things. So I can't remember if I've mentioned this.
I'm already forgetting things.
No, if I mentioned this within the podcast and you're hearing it again, but I had a friend who had gotten involved in Indian tribal culture while she was going through a phase where she sort of went away from Judaism for some very good reason. And what brought her back actually was she said that one of the ceremonies, I forgot what she called it, but some main ceremony actually reminded her of Yom Kippur davening. And I know that they were using consciousness altering, I guess peyote is an Indian thing, and they were using some other things there. So definitely it appears for sure in other cultures as well. But I think that so many other cultures get a lot of their basis of their religion from Judaism. So,
well, listen, I know that there are a lot of rabbis right now that will suggest, instead of going to an ayahuasca circle, instead of going to eat mushroom, instead of doing any of this, look into what the mystics were already doing. And there's evidence that mystical Judaism, with or without putting anything into your body, maybe other than air, but putting intention, you can shift your consciousness. There's even in Kabbalistic meditations, the divine names, saying the Yud, the K, the Vav, all of those things together are a way of shifting a certain level of consciousness. Intense prayer. Even you think about the Hasidim, so much of that. The Hasidic movement is about ecstatic connection, ecstatic dance, ecstatic prayer. Rebbe Nachman talked a lot about, whatever you do, you have to be happy with it. You have to act like a fool. If it takes acting like a fool to be happy and to laugh and experience joy, that's what you need to do. So I think that, modern idea, everybody's in ecstatic dance now. And I'm like, we've been doing that for a long time.
So,
cultures, but
I'm laughing because, again, I might have said this to Adriana off camera. So again, guys, if I'm repeating this story, I apologize. But this same friend, when she came to Israel for her very first trip, on Thursdays, I don't usually work in my office. So she was here for a few Thursdays. We went different places. So one of the Thursdays I took her to Tveria, and we did what I call I don't know, the nighttime kever roll. We went to Rabbi Meir Balanes and Rabbi Akiva and all of these different kvarim. And she was very into signs. And for whatever reason at this point, and, to my friend, if you're listening to this podcast, you'll know I'm describing you. And she kept finding feathers everywhere. And she was doing something to do with feathers at that time where she was finishing up with her whole Indian thing. And so the feathers to her were signs. And she found a feather, I think, at one of the kvarim. I think it was Rabbi Akiva. And she looked down at this bookshelf, and there was only one English book there. Everything else was in Hebrew. She doesn't speak Hebrew. She picked up the book, and it was Rabbi Nachman's book in English. And she said that wherever she opened to, that was going to be a sign. And she opened it to something where he was talking about like birds or feathers. But I took the book and I started reading it in English. And I'm like, oh my God, he was smoking crack. I'm like, I have no idea what this man is saying.
I will tell you, and this is it's in the copy of Rebbe Nachman. I think, I apologize if I'm getting this wrong, but I think it's Rebbe Nachman's Stories, which is put out by the Breslov Research Institute. They talk about putting a mark on the forehead of anybody who's accidentally ingested ergot. And ergot is the fungus that grows on wheat that is the root molecule of LSD.
Oh, okay.
Put a mark on the person of somebody who's accidentally ingested this, because they're going to act crazy and they're going to think they've lost their mind.
Wow.
Because at that time, it had not been like, it had not been LSD.
They didn't know. Right. Yeah. Right.
And so it's interesting. I mean, there are references, and there's also like, there is a tradition. I know there's a tradition of thinking about the Mon through, it's like Mon psychedelic theory. This is speculation, by the way. What I'm saying is speculation. This is not necessarily accepted by major rabbinic voices, but the idea that the Mon that fell from heaven when we were walking through the desert, maybe it contained a psychoactive compound. There's not a lot to support, like in biblical theory, but there is a little bit of a tradition of talking, at least talking about it that way and understanding it that way, that maybe there was. And listen, like, you have to think about how crazy the whole story of the Jews walking through the desert is anyway. We have this magical cloud hovering over us, and we're wearing clothing that never wrinkles, it never stains the day, it never tatters. We're always like beautifully pressed, covered. It's like a breezy, sunny 70-degree day in the desert, and we have bread falling from the sky. I mean, that kind of sounds a little bit like a psychedelic journey to me.
That's so funny.
Yeah, and look, there's the burning bush. You can apply psychedelic theory to that. So I think that, again, sometimes people want there to be blatant evidence that, look, we have it in our Masorah, we have it in our tradition. And it both is and is not true. We have it in our tradition to definitely let our consciousness consider these things as being psychedelic experiences. And we're part of humanity, and all of humans have been tripping. Almost all of humans have been tripping throughout time and doing things to change consciousness. Why wouldn't we have? But also, this is just who it is to be a Jew. To take a psychedelic, to change your consciousness, is to dive deeper into the fullness of the human experience. And what other tradition on the face of the earth ever thought about, felt, studied, analyzed, argued with? I mean, we're just that cool. That cool. And so why wouldn't we do something that pushes us to that edge? And also because it has such healing potential. And not that anybody's comparing oppression notes, but we've kind of had it bad throughout all of human history. Our generational trauma isn't buried back centuries. It's buried back decades. And before that, it was decades. And before that, it was decades, consistently. So to have, for Hashem to put psychedelic medication in the path of the Jewish people right now, or in the path of humanity, it's not coincidence. It's a refuah. It's a healing. It's like a pressure valve. It's like when the Instapot's done and you need to take the pressure valve. It's a kiss from God. It's like, here, feel a little better. It's still going to hurt, but feel a little better.
Listen, it also makes sense, because if you're telling me, I probably should have known this, but that LSD is actually grown on the shaft of wheat. You're saying it's the mold.
Well, I think I'm not a chemist. I don't know the whole history of the compound, but it's either inspired by the compound of ergot, or maybe they tinkered with ergot. I don't know the full history, but it is. But
either way, I'm saying if it's coming off a plant, mushrooms are coming from the ground, marijuana is coming from a plant. Like all the plants were in Gan Eden. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like Hashem gave us everything in Gan Eden. Like,
listen, I've been
and he said you could eat from the plants of the trees and the grasses of the earth. I think that includes the mushrooms.
Except from one. He did.
Except for one.
You were
Except
right
for one.
about that. So, yeah, I think people sometimes, I've been in this space now for over 8 years, both as somebody who has benefited from psychedelic medicine and I've been around the block with I've tried things and I've had hard trips. Bad. I don't really think they're bad. They're just very hard, challenging trips. You get so much out of them. And I've had very euphoric trips and I've had things in between. And I've been in environments in group medicine that I was like, this feels very unsafe and this isn't how we should be behaving right now. Like I've seen a lot. And I think, at the end of the day, everybody's trying hard to be better.
Right.
And we're trying hard to be better while also licking serious wounds, and people get like a little stuffy about, oh, it needs to be a plant medicine, right? And I'm only going to take ayahuasca because it comes from the ground, or a mushroom, or canna, or whatever. For me, the most effective medications have been synthetics, have been some of the things that people otherwise shy away from because they didn't come from the ground. But what I like to think is that they come b'siyata d'shmaya. We created them with Hashem.
Right.
Like, give me a blade of grass or give me something that I co-created with God. God gave us the inspiration and
for sure.
God, the creativity to make them. I'll try both of them.
Right. Listen, everybody has a different path in life. Everybody goes through different things. Everybody's gone through different trauma. I think I'm just lucky. Please God, I should never go through a trauma, the type of things that other people have gone through. So, but I'm open to hearing about and listening. I never wanted to try mushrooms or LSD because I was too scared of that thought of having a bad trip. But I absolutely understand why and how it can help people, especially done in the right setting. And I'm glad that there's something there for people.
The bad trips, why a lot of people never want to try them and why they think they're dangerous. And the truth is that these things can be dangerous. You can take these medications and not be sitting with the safest people, and
right. That's what Adriana said also.
And all sorts of stuff can happen. I hope that whoever's watching this does a couple of things. I hope they go down Wikipedia rabbit holes about herbalism and Judaism and even like challenge anything I've said or provide proof otherwise. But I hope that people, I want more rabbis to talk about psychedelic medicine. And there are real halakhic questions that have to be answered about them. If not, if maybe if the question's not outstanding, maybe if there's already sort of like a statement about them, I think that more people need to be brave enough in our leadership to talk about them so that we can also talk about how to do them safely. Because a lot of people are getting hurt right now.
I will say there's definitely religious Orthodox rabbis who are having people do this, who themselves have tried it. And I know this for a fact because I have spoken to some of them who would not come on and talk publicly or do the Torah extra, but I know for a fact that they've tried it.
Nobody wants to talk publicly about it, and they have good reason. They're great reasons, because what rabbi wants to say, hey, I gave my seal of approval, and now everybody's going crazy and is destabilized.
But we need people to do it just like we need the seal of approval of many rabbis to tell yeshiva students that it's okay to go to the army. But that's a different problem. But meaning people are waiting, many times people are waiting for a seal of approval. And they're ready and willing to do things, but they're waiting for a seal of approval.
I like seals of approval because it means like in the best way practice. Now, people give their seal of approval to stuff that they shouldn't. And people who should never be giving seals of approval give seals of approval. But if we think of like somebody who truly has what's best for the community in mind, to give that seal of approval is to open up the gates of safety. It's to be able to speak more openly. There's a lot of therapists and coaches and even rabbis who are now holding space for people who have been really hurt in psychedelics. And the same, they're holding space for people who are in such desperate pain that they need them. They've tried so much. Listen, I think all of this, hopefully we can just not talk about anymore if Mashiach would arrive.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Absolutely. But until then, people have to be open. That's why I do this podcast, is that I want to bring people many things that maybe they wouldn't consider or they hadn't heard about. And we're not telling anybody what to do. We're telling you just to open your mind and listen and learn and, not just do something because you're told to.
I can tell you right now, my very quick small testimonial without giving away my trauma or anything like that. But I'll just say that, I went over a decade without being able to cry.
Wow.
No tears. You could.
I teared up 5 minutes before we got on here because I was looking at TikTok and there was a dog that they're looking to rehome that's in the kennel. And I was tearing up.
That makes me cry. Anyway. Well, with all of those years I couldn't cry. The one thing that could put a frog in my throat was animals, anything animals. Give me specifically baby elephants would make me miss.
Really?
Elephant stuff. We could talk about that.
All right, I cried at my friend's son's wedding the other night, and she called me a baby, and I'm calling you out, and you know who you are. She told me I was a baby for crying at her son's wedding.
So
she's my best friend.
For 10 years, and the very first, it wasn't my very first psychedelic experience because I had done MDMA in college a few times. I had done mushrooms a few times, and I had done acid once on a hike, just for fun. All of these were for fun, and they were great experiences. But my first therapeutic psychedelic experience was with LSD, and I took a nice dose, and I saw a way that Hashem has woven I could actually visually sense and see this beautiful weave of the universe in front of me. And I was able to receive a very clear message that Hashem and my dad, who had blessed memory, he passed away in 2010, but that they needed me to know something, and they gave me instructions, a very doable instruction to heal something in my life or to start healing. Okay. I don't want to put it out there that psychedelics heal you, because they don't. They're just a tool. You have to heal you. They told me what I needed, something I needed to do to work on myself. And it was something that nobody could have told me to do this. It's so big, so tender, and so vulnerable. And as I was coming out of the medicine, I cried for 5 solid hours, just tsunami tears, cooking eggs from my husband the next morning, crying into the eggs and drawing things that I had seen in the experience.
Wow.
I had a mantra that I an affirmation that I said throughout the experience, and just doing things to hold space. But the tears just came, and I've had access to them since then. Sometimes easier access than others, and that's part of the work. That's part of me needing to heal me. But thank God, because tears, man, that's poison that stays in your body. It's
right.
Physical poison, and if you
makes sense,
let it out, it's not fun. It's not.
It makes sense.
Yeah, so
it makes sense. Wow. Well, I'm sure you have a much bigger story that maybe we talked about. We're not going to talk about right this minute, but that we talked about doing another little bonus episode for people who follow me on YouTube and show me that you followed me. And then we're going to give you some bonus footage that we're going to record another day. But Ginny, I absolutely loved this. Like I always say, you do not need to be a rebbitzin. One of the beautiful things about Torah is that we know, you could sit around a Shabbat table and everyone from the 6-year-old child or whatever, 2-year-old child, however old, anybody can give a Dvar Torah. Torah, everybody has access to Torah. And that's why
you're supposed to teach it. If you know it, you're supposed to pass on the Torah.
Listen, I love that. And that's why I love having different people. Some of the best Torah extros have been by people who are not educators, people who just love Torah. And everybody, I could give 4 people the same topic and they'll come up with 4 different things to say. And that's one of the most fascinating things that we get here, because I've here and there covered the same topic twice, and I get different people to do the Torah parts, and everybody comes up with something different. And I love it. And I thank you so much. And I'm so excited to have just met you and spoken to you today. And this was really, really, really great.
Well, if any of your listeners out there want to send this to some big rabbis and say, Bruce,
yes,
let's talk to you. I'm happy to sit down or Zoom and have a chat. It's time.
Amazing. And Ginny's contact is going to be in the show notes. and we'll let you guys know how to get in touch with her. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Please seek guidance from a trusted healthcare professional. By listening to this podcast, you release Holy Health and all of its guests from all liability. I'd like to thank Yakir Abela for editing this podcast.